this episode, I talk with talented writer and musician Peter Farris. Peter plays in the killer metal band Cable and is also a very accomplished writer. Some of his work includes The Devil Himself and A Last Call for the Living. After you are done with this episode, make sure to check out my fellow horsemen of the podcast apocalypse, the Necromaniacs podcast, Everything Went Black podcast, Into the Necrosphere podcast, and also the Soul Knocks podcast. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy. All right, Peter, thanks for being on the podcast, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon, for having me, man. It's great to finally chat.
I was saying before, I forgot to record the first couple minutes of this talk, but we were talking about our mutual friend Mike Hill. That's how I first came to know about you, Peter, and your work and stuff. And I just think it's really cool that Mike has such like an awesome circle of friends around him and stuff, and we can be part of that circle and stuff. Is just really cool and really supportive.
Yeah, Mike's a fascinating guy, very dynamic dude. I met him through we have some mutual friends that go way back to Mike's earliest bands and the sort of music scene in New England that he was very much a part of, like mid to late 90s, Hydra Head Records, etc. Yeah, I've been a huge fan of everything he does ever since, musically, his podcasts, and everything in between. So yeah, Mike's just a total badass dude.
Yeah, that he is. I finally got to meet him in person. We've been friends online for a while now, but he was touring down here in South Carolina earlier this year, or mid part of this year and stuff. We finally got to hang out and meet and stuff. And I actually got to see Tombs live because I've been a fan of fucking Tombs even before I knew Mike. Like, I remember picking up, I think it was Winter Hours in one of our local music stores on CD and stuff. And from then on, I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, that record is like timeless to me. I'll be listening to that album. I like all their stuff, but I'll be listening to Winter Hours like for the rest of my life. And yeah, I was bummed. I missed that tour ended in Atlanta, that quick short run they did. And I've got a 6-year-old at home, and getting out to shows is just, everything gets complicated. So I used to love going to see every show under the sun every week, but everything gets tricky now. And I regret not being able to go to see Tombs in Atlanta, but I saw them numerous times over the years, especially they did a lot of touring with Torch and Isis. And I saw a couple of those shows during the Winter Hours era and a couple times afterwards. And just Mike brings it every single night. Yeah. So he's just. Nice.
Yeah, that's killer. You got to see them with Isis and stuff and Torch. I've seen Torch multiple times, and they always kill it live. But I've never got to see Isis live, and that sucks. I wanted to see them. That was one of my favorite bands back in the day.
Yeah, I'm good friends with Jeff Cackside, as buddies call him, bass player, and that's how I met Mike. I think through him. They've all known each other for a long time, and Jeff's one of my really dear friends. And I was fortunate. I was living up in New England at the time, and joined a band called Cable. And this is right when Isis was really getting active. I mean, I saw them on the Mosquito Control tour, where when they were touring on that EP. I saw them a million times when they were touring on Celestial and Oceanic. And I was just like right place, right time. I was living up there, and they were just always playing. I saw them in Boston numerous times, all over the Northeast. So one of my favorite bands too, a Hall of Fame band for me.
That's killer. And I'm pretty sure during that time period, I listened to Cable as well. I wasn't like giant into all the work from y'all and stuff, like what you recorded and everything, but I have listened to Cable, and I remember liking it a lot. And I know you do vocals for Cable. Yeah,
Cable was part of a very interesting music scene and underground heavy music that was sort of fomenting. And the mid to late 90s was like a magical time for me. I'm going to date myself a little bit, but you had so much cool stuff going on. Amphetamine Reptile stuff, sludge like I Hate God and Buzz Oven. And then in the Northeast, you had like Dead Guy, Today's the Day, Unsane, and then Neurosis influenced a ton of bands, and you started to see like that whole Hydra Head scene. Everyone coalesce, Isis, Cave-In, Converge, and yeah, I don't know, man. 96 to like 2001 was just like a really magical time up there, and so many great bands and records came out in that little era.
Yeah, it's such a unique, heavy sound coming around that time too. Nothing else that was like it, at that time. It was totally unique, totally heavy.
Yeah, heavy music now. I remember when Headbangers Ball came back and Jimmy Josta was hosting it, and like heavy music kind of had this moment where it felt mainstream and it never stopped. I mean, there's huge package tours and heavy music bands draw big crowds to this day. But man, there was something about heavy music in the mid to late 90s. It was very underground still and sincere, and just people on their own wavelength just doing radical stuff as far as extreme music is concerned. And that's across all the subgenres, crazy tech metal bands, death metal, noise, sludge, and everything in between. I'm very nostalgic for that time because that's when I discovered a lot of awesome shit that I still listen to, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, totally, man. Like Neurosis got me into a lot of bands. Neurosis got me into ISIS and all that like super heavy stuff like Red Sparrows, like even Tombs, because Tombs has some Neurosis stuff, especially the earlier things. I can definitely hear some influences from Neurosis, but
yeah, they were like a gateway band for me. When I got turned on to Neurosis, I can remember the day I bought Enemy of the Sun on CD at Cutler's Records in New Haven, Connecticut. I can't remember where I bought every single record in my life, and it's a lot of them, but I always remember my first Neurosis album. And you discover a band and you start reading interviews with them, and they talk about who they were influenced by, and it just opens all these doors. And next thing you know, you're going down these wormholes. Now it's like you're on YouTube and you're just like, or Bandcamp, and you're just checking out one band after another. But back then it was a little bit harder, and Neurosis like opened the floodgates for me. And everything, like my musical tastes were very much formed by Neurosis and Swans. So yeah, a lot of special memories, man, from that time. Mike was right in the thick of it too, with his first band Anodyne, or one of his early bands. And yeah, I'm just like amazed I know some of these dudes, because I've admired them from afar.
Yeah, with Neurosis, it was the DVD of Sun That Never Sets that really got me going, man. First time I watched that DVD, I was like, holy shit, it's so like, I don't know, it gets in your head, man. You don't forget it. And like, I got obsessed with that DVD. I watched it over and over and over. And then from then on, I started buying Neurosis records and stuff, and really.
Yeah, it was like an event when they released a new album, and it still is for me. I love that DVD too. It was that record when it came out, I was kind of divisive. I think it's aged really, really well. I just listened to it on vinyl the other day, and it still holds up. A timeless album I'll always listen to. Yeah, I can remember my junior year in college, junior or senior year in college, and I was like a part of, I don't know if like Neurot Recordings, like if it was a fan club or I was like a subscriber, and they'd send you like an old school paper catalog of their merch. And I bought on VHS tape them live in San Francisco on New Year's Eve. And they played like the Sovereign EP and a lot of stuff off of Times of Grace. And man, I wore that tape out. It's on YouTube now, along with everything else. But back then there was no YouTube.
Right.
So I had this like, I wish I could I might still have it. This old Neurosis, like official release from the band, VHS tape of them live in San Francisco. And it was the be all end all for me. I watched it dozens of times because they were absolutely crushing during that time. And the stuff off the Sovereign EP is just some of their best material, in my opinion. And yeah, boy, man, I'm feeling like super nostalgic now thinking about that, watching old VHS tapes of Neurosis and stuff.
I'm always in that mood now. Like I really hate like modern days are just fucking insane. I'm always like going back to the 90s, VHS tapes and stuff from the 90s, music from the 90s, just trying to get that feeling again. It's like it was crazy back then, but I don't think it's quite as crazy as it is now. So it's good to like, go back in time.
You get to, you feel like you've sort of seen it all. But it's the one cool thing about YouTube and other, the modern age that we're living in, where all these great old shows from that period that you think might be lost to time get uploaded. Somebody had a camcorder on their shoulder, and whether it's live stuff from CBGB's or Neurosis live in '99 or something, I'm glad that it's like found a way and we can access it now so easily, like with this supercomputer in our pocket. Because yeah, it's great, man. That's when I was going to shows the most. I was like, that was my formative sort of education in heavy music. And it's great to hop on YouTube and like watch, like, I don't know, like Dead Guy videos from '96 and it's all there,
Yes, it's surprising how many videos were captured back then that got uploaded onto YouTube. Like you didn't think that even existed. Well, guess what? It does. Somebody got that on tape, you know?
Yeah, or someone found an old box in a closet, and like there's like a million old I don't know bloodlet videos from some ancient tour in the mid '90s, and yep, up on YouTube it goes, man. Like nothing's safe, but I'm glad that there is a. It's a great time to be alive if you're a music fan. There's certainly a lot of things that are challenging if you're a musician, just like it's very challenging to be a writer right now or do anything creative. But also, there's an upside too, so it's good to have perspective on all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we have so much stuff at our fingertips right now when it comes to music and movies and stuff. It's insane. Like, you get bored trying to figure out what the hell you want to listen to or watch. You know, it's just so many choices, dude. It's like, ah.
Yeah, and I go through musical mood swings throughout the year, and depending on like in the fall and winter, I gravitate towards like a lot of heavy stuff, dark ambient music, black metal, and then I swing out of that, during the warmer months, I guess. And it might sound crazy to some folks, but if you're a music freak like us, it probably makes sense. And it's like a fire hose of content. There's so many bands, there's so many ways you can access music now, and a lot of great stuff out there. It's great if you're a listener and a fan, if you're like creating it and trying to establish yourself and make a name for yourself, get a record out, get a novel out or whatever. It's next to impossible to get any recognition because there's so much of it out there. So
Right. Yeah, I totally feel you on the whole listening to certain things during the season. Like everywhere from like October on up, when it starts getting colder, is Typo Negative, Agalloch. Tombs is also great for cold weather listening. I don't know why. I listen to Tombs all year long, but like Winter Hours is a great one to listen to, during the cold times. It just gives you that feeling.
Yeah, fall is like a very special time for me. When the leaves turn, the hoodies come out. It's fire pit music. I love fall craft beer that comes out in the fall, seasonal beer. Yeah, I love Agalloch. I'm also really big outdoor person. I hunt. I do a little fishing, but I hunt a lot. I hike a lot. So like Agalloch, Wolves in the Throne Room, all the Scandinavian stuff. Finnish Funeral Doom, like you name it. When the weather turns cool and the leaves start falling, like that's what I gravitate to the most, without question. Yeah, and Neurosis too, horror movie soundtracks, dark ambient music, all of that stuff. Like that's my jam in the fall and winter.
It's the best part of the year when the leaves start turning. That's my time to shine, man. I hate the summer. I work outside all year, work on this big giant private island, and I've sweat my ass off, for 50% of the year.
Oh
So when
God.
it starts to cool down, I'm like, oh God, I love it. And people are like, oh, it's too cold. I'm like, I'm good, man. I'm
Yeah.
out there in a short sleeve shirt and like 30 degrees. This feels
Yeah,
great to me. I'm good.
summer sucks, man. It sucks in the South too. I mean, you go to your mailbox and you get back to the house and you need to change of clothes. It's so oppressively muggy, and if you're working outdoors, it's doubly bad. And my wife loves she loves Halloween as much as I do, but she also loves Christmas and Easter and stuff, especially since we have a little boy in the house, our son. But I only give a shit about Halloween. It's the only holiday that matters. And October is my favorite month of the year. So I'm in my element that time of year. My musical tastes align. I want to watch horror movies and just sit outside by the fire, and listen to black metal and drink beer. That's that is heaven to me, basically.
No, that's pretty much right up me and my wife's alley. And we live in South Carolina, so I'm pretty sure you're Georgia, right?
Yeah, I'm not far from you. I don't know where you are in South Carolina, but we're about 45 minutes north of downtown and in the foothills of the Chattahoochee National Forest. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So I definitely feel for you when it comes to the mugginess and the heat.
Oh yeah. It's brutal, and I like this time of summer, like things start to turn a little bit. You start seeing Halloween stuff popping up in stores, and I just start to get excited for this misery to end and fall to arrive. So it's I don't know, man. It might probably sound crazy to some folks out there, but I don't know. I feel like in the fall and October, as we approach Halloween, I feel like in sync with the universe, and I just feel happy.
Me too.
And I don't know. All my friends are wired that way as well. Almost all of my friends we've gravitated towards each other. Are freaks for fall, freaks for Halloween, freaks for October, and they're all heavy music fans too.
Well, it makes sense. I tell people at work all the time, like, man, I can smell it in the air. October's coming. It's like, can you smell that? They're like, ah, they look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, I'm telling you, I can smell October's
Yeah.
coming, you know?
No,
It's like a
I
slight hint of burnt leaves or it's something, man. Like you know it's coming.
Oh, the second they tear, the leaves start to turn and start falling from certain types of trees earlier rather than later, and then you know it's just around the corner. And I think it was William Faulkner. You know, he wrote a book called Light in August, one of his famous novels. And I think if maybe a Faulkner academic out there will tell me I'm an idiot and totally wrong. But if I'm not mistaken, that book was inspired by the notion that there's a moment in August where the weather cools off for a couple days, and there's something about the light and that there's a hint of fall in the air. And I've noticed it. So this coming month, keep an eye out for maybe 1 or 2 days where it gets cool and you just feel this touch of fall in the air. And I think that's what A Light in August was referencing. And I'm like looking for it. My point is I'm like ready for that little moment in August to get excited about the fall.
Yeah, and it's coming too. So I'm excited. Like, get this fucking heat away from me, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So I want to ask you, how did you get started into writing?
Yeah, I grew up with a writer for a dad. My dad, John Farris, is known mostly in the horror genre, but he wrote other stuff, psychological thrillers and some suspense novels. And he was published right out of high school, and had a bestseller at like 19 or 20. So he had an extraordinary career. He's retired now, but I had a full-time novelist for a dad. My mom worked too, but I grew up to the sound of like a typewriter in the house. I just grew up with this. My dad just sat at a typewriter every day and got his pages done. And I was surrounded by books too. He was a voracious reader, and he had these beautiful bookshelves in his office, and I was just enamored with them. And I loved to read at an early age as well. So I think that planted the seed right there, my upbringing. And then playing music in bands as a vocalist, you start writing lyrics. And when I got serious about writing fiction, and discovered a few authors that sort of became my Mount Rushmore writers, it was a natural transition from writing lyrics to writing like a poem to writing a short story, and then eventually attempting like a novel length piece of work, so it's kind of a natural progression for me, I guess.
Who are a few of your favorite authors?
Um, I grew up reading horror stuff like my dad's work and Stephen King and Peter Straub and Richard Matheson and Clive Barker. And I loved all that stuff when I was younger. But then when I discovered, I'm going to sound very pretentious here, but like a writer, you discover your voice. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's it's true for musicians too. It's like you hear a certain band and you realize that's what I want to play, like whether it's Neurosis or Morbid Angel or whatever. You're like, you first learn an instrument and you're not really sure like what kind of music you want to write. And then something like triggers this path for you. And for me, it was like regional writers, Southern writers, mostly. I like mystery and crime fiction a lot, but it's Southern writers like Ron Rash, Larry Brown, Flannery O'Connor, Cormac McCarthy, of course, Eudora Welty. There's a lot of Southern regional short story writers and novelists that really like the light bulb went off for me as far as this is what I want to write. And some crime fiction writers too, even going back to Raymond Chandler. So I still love horror and read it every year, especially in the fall, but it wasn't what I wanted to write, if that makes sense. So.
That's cool. Yeah, I know you said Stephen King was somewhat of an influence as well. And yeah, Stephen King is fucking a master of the craft.
Yeah, it's amazing how prolific he is. Even at his age, he continues to write at a high level, but at a level that appeals to a really broad general audience, which is hard to do. He's had a very, a storied career. He inspired so many writers, regardless of if you want to write horror or thrillers or whatever. Everybody looks to King as sort of this model. And I certainly, idolized him as a kid. And I idolized my dad too, who kind of came right before Stephen King and even was admittedly by King an influence on him. And to sort of see the work that goes into it takes a lot of work, takes a lot of luck too. But yeah, I mean, I can still remember like reading The Stand as what I don't know, it was probably 12 or 13. And the second I finished it, I wanted to go right back to the first page and just start it over again. That rarely happens anymore.
Right.
You know, everyone's time is valuable. And the idea of like, there are very few books I'd probably want to reread instantly, but King and The Stand was a perfect example. When I was a young kid and just loved to read. And for so many people my age, and older and younger. If you want to write fiction, at some point in your life, Stephen King factors into that decision, I think.
I saw an interview with him saying, I think it was on his like his keys to writing, and supposedly he doesn't do outlines. He just writes. He just lets the story take him. There's no outlines, and if that's true, that's insane.
Yeah, especially considering he's written whatever over 60 novels. My dad was the same way. I've heard this expression. You're either like a plotter or a pantser, and pantser meaning like you fly by the seat of your pants, I think is what that expression is getting at. I'm the same way too. I've never plotted a novel. It can definitely, you have moments you want to pull all your hair out, whereas if you've gotten you have everything outlined, and some writers are meticulous outliners, and they pretty much, as a podcast host I was on his show, David Temple, said, like, you just pretty much put the key in the ignition, turn it over, and get on the gas and go. You've got everything laid out. You just got to fill in the blanks. Whereas if you're making it up on the go, it can be a very frustrating process. But then there's also a lot of discovery and unintentional stuff that happens. And for me, the book feels more organic and alive. So yeah, every writer's different. And I can't fault a writer one way or the other on what they decide, how they decide to make the work. There's no right or wrong way to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's cool to know that you do it the same way, as King does. You don't go in with a preconceived plan, I guess you would say. You just kind of go with it.
Yeah, my dad would talk about he wrote for himself first and foremost. And if he was bored, then he knew the reader would be bored. And he liked the surprises that come with not having a really meticulous plot laid out. And so I've always appreciated that. And it just came naturally to me to just my work has started with like a scene in my head, like a film, like a film, the scene from a film, and I have to figure out how to get there. And more often than not, with the novels I've written that have been published in France and then the two in the United States, I had like I had an ending, like the end of a film in my head, and I had to figure out like how to get to that scene and how to explain it, so, who's the person we're looking at, what's their story, what's happened to them. And so that's how my stuff, how I've gotten my books sort of written, is doing that. I wouldn't suggest it to everybody because you want to beat your head against the wall, but
I like to write short stories, and I tried to write something a bit longer than a short story. I was like, oh, I'm going to write my first novel. This was a couple of years ago now, but I just came in like I kept overthinking everything. I didn't go in with a plan really. I had like an idea in my head. I started writing and stuff, and I don't know, I burnt out on it, and I hit a wall I never got away from with that, the longer story I was trying to write there. So it's cool to hear like your approach to it and stuff, because I still want to go back and do some more writing. So many things I like to do, and there's a little bit of time,
Yeah, I have a lot of hobbies too many, if you ask my wife, I imagine. But writing a novel length work that a novel that works, there's so many you're doing when you write fiction, and the same applies for short stories too. It's a dance, it's a dance with the details you're using, the details you're not using. If you do, research you may do, dialogue, pacing, characterization. There's all these things. You know what? I love music metaphors because that's what I know, even if they come out as cheesy. But it's like, you write the record and then you get it and then you go into the studio and record it. And there are parallels with writing draft after draft and going through the editing process. So like, you've written a record and then you're there at the mixing board with an engineer. You're the engineer, you're the mixer or the master, and then you start adjusting levels. And it's very comparable to like what goes into getting a novel right. And when novels don't work and they're overly long, or they're turgid, or they're sluggish, or they're, there's other things you can criticize about a book that's just not very well written. That's the challenge that writers face, is getting all that stuff right. It's like trying to make a very well mixed, mastered album.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
With
Yeah.
good songs, like an album of the best songs you can write, mixed and mastered perfectly. And that's sort of that's the challenge every writer, the gold ring you're chasing after to grasp, is like just to write that perfect novel. And you won't succeed, but at least you'll strive to do your best.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I like that. That's cool. So I'm on I'm not quite done yet with The Devil Himself. I'm on like chapter 10. I've been reading on the Kindle version. So
Cool.
because I have shitty lighting in my house. I love books, but man, my lighting is terrible in my house here. I can't read nowhere, so I do it on Kindle, which is a lot better on my eyes.
Oh, for sure, man. I've been gravitating more towards e-readers too, for that very reason. Although I still, I still love, like, the smell of a book. I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
physical copies of a book, and I've always had a collector fetish. I love records on vinyl, and I have way too many vinyl records, and I still love buying books. But Kindle's really revolutionized things, especially if you travel. Lighting's not good, or you just don't have the space. If you live in an apartment or something, or you just don't have the room to dedicate to like stacks of books. They're a godsend.
Yeah, totally. And like I said, the biggest thing for me, it's easier on my eyes. And I don't have to worry about trying to find the right light. Because the older I get, my eyes get a little bit worse. I mean, that's just natural. But it kind of sucks. I used to be able to read in the dark as a kid almost back in the day,
Yeah,
My dad
no,
was like, oh, you can't read in the dark. It's be bad for your eyes. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm good.
I was the same way, and I can't even imagine the damage I did to my eyesight by, like, reading I Am Legend or something under my sheets, like as a little kid, in poor light. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. But thank you for reading it, man. The book, yeah, came out. It's available as an ebook. It came out also a hardcover edition, and an audiobook just came out, which is my first audiobook, which is really interesting to hear, like, an actor read your prose, and bring your characters to life. And it was a trip. An actress named Megan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. I hope I am. Tussing, or Tusing, was the narrator on it. And it was just such a trip to hear her, like, read my words and bring them to life. It's just very, very cool, very strange, but very cool.
How did you come up with the story or the inspiration for the devil himself? I mean, the devil himself. I want to say the devil inside for some fucking reason, but yeah, the devil himself.
Yeah, no worries. The book was partly inspired. I love regional fiction, and I like, crime fiction set in the South. There's some gothic stuff in the book, but it is ultimately kind of like a crime thriller set in the Deep South. And my wife's family's from South Georgia, and I got very close with her grandparents. And over the years, they tell me stories about life in South Georgia, growing up in the 50s and 60s and 70s, people they knew, stories, funny stories, tragic stories, etc. And there was an interesting character that they knew who kind of had some outlaw ways and dabbled in a little bit of moonshining, and was kind of eccentric. He sort of trolled people before there was trolling. You know what I mean? And so he, for a time, was known to ride around. He put a mannequin in his car, and in the passenger seat, and he rode around town with this mannequin. And he did it like as a lark, just to get a rise out of people. Like I said, sort of trolling the town folks who kind of didn't approve of him. So he didn't do it consistently or anything, but I love that image of a man driving around in like a truck with a mannequin, like a mannequin dressed up with makeup and a wig and a dress. And I took that image a step further, and I thought, what if this guy lives with this mannequin full time? What if he talks to it? What if he prepares it? He prepares meals for it, takes it to the movies. And then I naturally, asking these pragmatic questions, I thought, well, what if what if this mannequin's filling like some sort of void in his life, some sort of hole and emotionally, and what caused that. And from there, you can see a story starts to develop about this guy. And I threw in some sort of crime fiction elements that are familiar to readers of that genre. So I've got like a cartel and corrupt cops, and I've got a girl on the run, so familiar elements there. But I tried to do something different with crime fiction with this very sort of peculiar, eccentric character. It's almost like something out of a Coen Brothers film or something.
Oh yeah, I can definitely see that. I can also see Leonard as almost kind of sort of like a slasher, especially some of the kills he does. He just kind of appears out of nowhere and you're pretty much dead.
Yeah,
I kind of see that.
He's sort of he's not. I tried to draw him as a sympathetic character, but he's no saint. I mean, he's a brutal person. He's capable of extreme violence, and he's an outlaw his whole life, and also an eccentric hermit. And there's I don't know where you are in the book yet. You mentioned it, so I don't want to give anything away to you or to anybody listening who might want to pick up the book. But you do learn there is more to that story about the mannequin. And Leonard's backstory, and that's where it's a big pivot in the book and a revelation. And so, yeah, I love writing books. My first novel was about a member of the Aryan Brotherhood who robbed a bank, and a despicable human being. But I had people actually rooting for the guy by the end of the book, which is I get a sick joy out of doing that. And in The Devil himself, I've got a very strange guy, but he does have a code and some honor and a heart of gold. He's just a very warped way of showing it, I guess. So, yeah, but he was a lot of fun to write, and I just was just inspired by this notion of a guy riding around with a mannequin in South Georgia in the 1970s, and I made a book out of it basically.
Yeah, I could see that happening in Georgia and South Carolina.
For sure. I mean, the South is such a rich place. It's obviously a rich literary tradition, and small towns in particular you start talking to older folks and you just start hearing these just wonderful stories, scary stories, bizarre stories. It's like David Lynch's Blue Velvet. You like take a peek behind the curtain of any southern town and you'll find like mold. You'll find corruption, you'll find perverts and family drama and all this stuff just underneath the surface. And I love that about the South. And Devil himself is certainly no exception. Is when you start to learn about this town where he lives and his backstory. And I relish in that. And I love that about the South.
Yeah, there's smiling faces and dark shit behind the doors.
Yeah, exactly.
I know recently that you posted this book got picked up to be a film.
Yeah, it was optioned recently. It's at Miramax right now, and we have I adapted it. It's my screenplay, and we have a director, Laurent Bouzereau, who's a really talented filmmaker attached to direct, and a producer who's been working tirelessly to try and set this up. They love my script, and it's finally starting to come together. It's a big first step. I really can't say more about it, but it's in development, and if we hopefully can cast the film and it gets greenlit, the thing will go, and we'll shoot it in Georgia is my hopes. But a lot of stuff has to work out. It's amazing if any film gets made, because so much stuff has to like align and come together, but it's been exciting so far. We'll see what happens.
I do have a recommendation. Nick Cage plays Leonard, if possible.
Yes. It's funny you mentioned that, but yeah, I love Nicolas Cage, and he's had you could say a resurgence. He's never stopped working. I loved him in The Color Out of Space. It's probably my favorite. Yeah. My favorite Lovecraft short story of all time. And he's, a few moments he really goes over the top, and it's just, I always enjoy his performances. And then Pig, he was just absolutely remarkable in. Yeah, I would love, it's the idea is to find an older guy, and it's very much a grandfatherly relationship in the book. It's an older guy in the twilight of his life, and this sort of young woman, and it's not sexual at all. Their relationship, again, it's grandfatherly, and that was very intentional. I didn't want to go there at all because I think it would have ruined the story. And so, yeah, if we could to find an older actor, it's a great role. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, while I'm reading and stuff, I'm just thinking, oh, this is Nick Cage, man. I'm telling you, like this would be perfect for him. So hopefully,
Yeah.
who knows, man? Maybe that'll happen. That would be fucking awesome.
Yeah, and in a different era, there's other actors that I think would be wonderful. Tommy Lee Jones or Clint Eastwood, perhaps a little bit younger now. He's too old for a role like that. And this is just my fantasy wish cast that has nothing to do with the film project, and I can't talk about that. But like in my head, or going back to an actor I love, Powers Booth, who sadly passed away. But yeah, Nicolas Cage is great. He's certainly gonna be fantastic. So we'll see. I'll watch him in anything.
Oh, dude, same here. I love him. His big resurgence to me was in Mandy, which is my favorite film at this time. Like, hasn't been beat yet, but
that is such a psychotic movie, certainly psychedelic too, and one of my favorite film scores of recent memory. I love Johan Johansson, and that score, I have it on vinyl. Is just again, there's a record that's in heavy rotation in October.
Yeah, that one gives me chills. Like the movie gives me chills, and so does the album. It's like, oh, it's perfect. Like, can't believe this is even made.
Yeah, and he is fantastic in it too. That is such a demented, balls to the wall. I don't even know what kind of movie it is. I mean, it's got horror elements. It's got those the bikers remind me of the Cenobites from Hellraiser.
Oh, big time, yeah.
It's extremely psychedelic, and it's almost just uncategorizable to me. Like I don't even know how to describe that film to somebody who hasn't seen it, other than it's just this sort of acid trip into just a deranged hellscape.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, you don't have to do drugs to watch it either, with getting that same like feeling of psychedelia fucking horror. It's just like fuck.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Only thing I regret, I've never got to see it in theaters. I've watched it at home with my volume as high as it goes up. But I bet if I saw it in theaters, it'd be like even more impactful than what it was, just with the fucking soundtrack and everything.
Yeah, I didn't see it in theaters either, but it was just a really demented film. And also the folk music that I think that was released after the fact, that the cult leader, played by that great Irish actor, and I'm blanking on his name, but I don't know if the filmmaker and that actor got together and recorded that an album of music, and it's very spooky sounding. I mean, it sounds like a psychedelic 60s folk rock,
Mm-hmm.
That was cool. And then, I know Stephen O'Malley from Sun lent some guitar work to that soundtrack as well. And yeah, it sounds like I don't know. Yeah, it almost sounds like a Sun record at times. And it's just on its own is fantastic music, but combined with the visuals in that film, it's just truly unsettling. That's a movie I watch. I find myself watching almost every Halloween now, every October anyway.
Oh yeah, that's easily a one or two times a year movie to watch. There's Mandy. Like I can watch it, as many times as I want, still get that same emotional feeling, like I've just been hit in the face with a baseball bat.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a sad one too, man. What he has to go through and stuff. What Ray goes through, like, it's rough.
Yeah, it is a tragic film, and Nicolas Cage is just phenomenal in it. Doing his thing. It's hard. It's like he's a genre unto himself at this point,
Like I said, when he played in Pig, that was another like devastatingly heavy movie. I was like, oh man, it was so good, so heavy though,
Yeah, he was perfectly cast. He's like sort of born for that role, and it's just that was another remarkable film of his, and this like great resurgence or renaissance. And he's been acting for nearly more than 40 years. It's a really impressive career he's had. I know that people have criticized him for some what they call streamers, or what they used to call straight to video fare, and actors take jobs for different reasons, but even a lot of that stuff is worth watching. Even if it wasn't as widely praised as certainly Pig, or didn't get the recognition that Mandy got. He's great in everything. Another great movie, if you haven't seen him in, is called Joe, which was adapted from one of my favorite Larry Brown novels, and
Yeah, Joe's killer. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, he's so good in Joe. And that's one of my, you talk about Mount Rushmore writers, Larry Brown, who wrote Joe, and that novel in particular were a huge influence on me and why I wanted to write like books set in the South and rural areas. And that, and it was adapted by David Gordon Green too. I was, doing all the Halloween stuff now, but it's just like such a special small movie, and I'm just so glad that they're able to make it happen. And Nicolas Cage, that's inspired casting, in a film like that, and I'm just really fond of that performance too.
Yeah, most definitely. That's a good one. That's another one. Definitely check out if you haven't seen it, for sure. Talking about David Gordon Green, like they filmed a lot of stuff in Georgia and also South Carolina for the new Halloween film. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of film and TV production in Georgia, and has been for many years now. When they, incentivized and tried to attract, film productions to the state with the tax incentives and credits. So, yeah, I mean, you can't throw a rock and not hit like a production assistant in Atlanta. There's film crews all over the place, and for good reason. And I'm not surprised that they shot it here. You still see a lot of film production in places like Vancouver. They used to shoot a lot of stuff in Shreveport, used to shoot a lot of stuff in like Wilmington, but now Georgia's it. I tell people all the time, Atlanta's like LA's little brother. We've got, they're making everything from Tyler Perry has a complex here, obviously all the Marvel stuff and everything in between. I've worked on a film production here in Atlanta, and there's just so much talent who live here now, who work on the production side of things. So, yeah, if fingers crossed, the devil himself is a go, I hope that they would be able to shoot it in Georgia, not only because I live here, but because the book's set here as well.
Yeah, that'd be killer. And this would be your first novel to movie, correct?
Yeah, this is my first novel, and also, since I adapted it, screenplay option. And so yeah, it's a big first step. I've been really focused on screenwriting over the past 18 months. I've always thought of myself as a novelist first and foremost. I've published, this book Devil Himself had kind of a long journey to get published in the United States, but it came out in France several years ago, and did really well, was received really well, and helped me sort of establish a little bit of a career in France. They really love writers over there. And now I have a fourth novel coming out in France next year. So I'm lagging in the United States, but The Devil Himself finally came out in English this past year. And then it got I've had some opportunities on the screenwriting front, and I've been pursuing those lately. I've written several screenplays, including adapting one of my dad's horror novels, and writing The Devil Himself, and working on a TV project. So I'm just giving it a shot, but I think of myself as a novelist before anything else,
That's killer. Can you say anything about what you're writing for the screenplays, or that's the board?
Yeah, I mean, I've a little bit. Some of it's, I've been collaborating with the director attached to The Devil Himself, Laurent Bouzereau, on a couple things. And a couple of them are properties of my dad's that we think have tremendous potential, and then I've adapted all of my work too. So I even have a screenplay adaptation for my first novel, which is called Last Call for the Living. So I've been doing it for a bit, but there's been a few opportunities to shop projects around and try and get some traction, and so I'm trying to take advantage of it now while I can, and then we'll see what happens. It's show business, again, like publishing. Any creative pursuit, you need a lot of luck. It's all timing and luck. Play are, to me, as important, if not more, than talent and hard work. And that's certainly true in the publishing business. It's pretty dismal. I know so many great writers who can't get published or aren't publishing at a high level because, circumstances and luck, they can't catch a break, or they can't spend $10,000 on a publicist, which is what it takes to maybe get your book and name out there. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's it's tough, but I'm going for it, and I do enjoy screenwriting. It is a lot of fun, and we'll see. The Devil Himself is sort of the first big break for me, and we'll see what happens with it.
And are you allowed to say the title of your new book that's over in France right now, or?
Yeah, yeah. I've written, I'll have 4 novels published by next year. I wrote a novel called The Clay Eaters, which came out in France a couple years ago, and that hit their bestseller list and was received well. And I've been able to go over there a couple times on book tours, and I think I'll have an opportunity to go back next year. And my new novel is called The Bone Omen, and it's another sort of deep South. Quasi-crime novel. I'm not sure how to describe it, but it definitely plays in sort of the crime fiction sandbox. But it's definitely my most ambitious book to date and my longest too. And that's coming out in France next year with my longtime publisher. I've done 4 books with them now. So I'm excited about that. I don't know how it'll be received, but I wrote it during COVID, during 2020 and the worst parts of the pandemic. So it's my darkest, bleakest novel to date. Definitely not a happy ending. And it was written at a point where, like everybody, everyone was a lot of despair, a lot of uncertainty and fear, during the pandemic. And I'm sure a lot of creative people wrote their darkest record or made their darkest movie or wrote their darkest novel in 2020 into 2021. And I was no exception. So we'll see. It might end my career in France and I never publish again, but I don't care. I had to write it. It's done. And thankfully it sold. And my publisher is very excited about it over there. So we'll see what happens.
That's killer. And is there any kind of expected date for the U.S. versions of these, or?
No, not yet. I'm back right now to not having a U.S. publisher again. I've told a lot of folks who've read my stuff sort of know The Devil Himself has been a 10-year journey to get it published. My first novel, Last Call for the Living, came out with a big publisher in New York, but it wasn't published well. And a literary agent I was with at the time took me on and was shopping around Devil Himself, but it didn't sell. And then the book just kind of sat there for years and years. Finally, it came out in France and it was published, if I can say it, to great acclaim. It was reviewed critically. It was received really well. It sold well, won some awards, but that still didn't matter in the States. And finally, I was introduced to a literary agent who wanted to take me on and get this book out. And so it was a 10-year journey to get The Devil Himself published. And I thought I'd never publish in the United States again. So it's kind of a miracle knowing how bad the publishing business is that I was able to get it out. But again, I find myself without a publisher for books 3 and 4. But we'll see. My agent's going to take those books out to market, and we'll see what happens with that. If The Devil Himself film goes, that'll certainly help. But it's really tough out there for writers. Really, really tough market to get published in, and it's a shame, unfortunately. But that's the state of things. So.
It's probably like music too, and like a lot of oversaturation. There's tons of writers, tons of bands, hard to get.
Yeah, man. I joke, I tell people if they want to write, like, no, don't quit. We don't need any more writers. Like, we don't need any more bands. But you don't want to tell anybody that. It's just the fact that, I don't know what books are selling anymore. And so maybe I shouldn't run my mouth about it, but I will just speculate. I don't think people don't buy books anymore. They don't sell like they used to. Certainly bookstores are disappearing. There's not many of those. The stark differences with France, where bookstores still are thriving. They have government regulations that don't allow giant retailers to undercut independent bookstores. So the Amazons of the world over there can only discount a book 5%, same as like your mom and pop neighborhood bookstore. So people buy books at bookstores, and they're everywhere. And to be a bookseller is like a noble profession over there. So it's like how we wish it was in America, but that's not the case in America. So yeah, it's like with bands, like trying to find a record label. There's just so many bands out there. You can self-publish, you can self-release your work, but will it be heard? This fire hose of content every day, every week, 1 million books come out, and every week 1 million books disappear. So it's just hard. It's really hard to get any recognition, certainly hard to make any money writing. And it's a shame. It's sad, but that's the reality. A lot of writers are writing in the wrong decade,
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, the bookstores disappearing. Video stores are pretty much all gone. There may be a couple mom and pop ones here and there, like niche ones or whatever, but like the majority of video stores are gone, man. Like,
Yeah, it used to be a cool thing. I remember like when I lived up north going to Kim's Video in New York, and if you have a collector fetish, like a lot of metalheads and voracious readers do, you like it's great to go and a boutique DVD store that had a lot of imported stuff, and you could go digging and find like cult films and stuff. Now everything's online, and you feel like everything it should be free and easily accessible. And with books, it's kind of similar trajectory into, flaming dumpster fire. Like, um, the number of bookstores, it's very hard for booksellers to compete with the Amazons and Costco's and Walmarts of the world. And it's a shrinking marketplace. And even for if you want to publish at a high level where your book's distributed widely and a professional product is created, those opportunities, it's a buyer's market. There's so many writers out there. There's only so many agents and there's only so many publishers, and it's a shrinking marketplace. So, yeah, I don't know. And it's like playing the lottery. Some writers like get lucky and their book takes off and gets made into a movie and it sells some copies. But I don't know. I don't feel like people are buying books anymore. And I do wonder in 20 or 30 years, will people even be reading novels? I don't know.
so scary to think of, It's like, man,
Yeah, I hate to. It's like sort of a doomy, gloomy outlook, but it's just what I see. I don't know. I can't speak to actual numbers, but even books that are on the New York Times bestseller list now, I don't think that their writers who are perennial bestsellers are selling like they used to at all. Not even close. Compared to 10 or 20 years ago. Which is a shame. When my dad was coming up, at one point in the 60s, he was making more money than his father, my grandfather, who was an engineer. And he was writing pulp novels, like dime pulp novels. So back
right.
then, you could make money as a writer. And now it's really, really hard.
It's crazy. Then you have like YouTube stars making millions of dollars for some bullshit, like
Like,
crazy, weird video.
you just want to fucking jump off a bridge. Yeah, it's like a kid eating like laundry detergent has millions of viewers and subscribers and likes or whatever, and you work your ass off on a novel that, I would strive to write a novel that technically is proficient and professional, and watch it just drop off the face of the earth and barely sell 100 copies or something. And that happens to tons and tons of writers, and it's really demoralizing. But if it's what you do and what you love, you just you can't. It's like a compulsion. You almost can't not want to write. But it's bleak. I'll tell you, it's bleak and demoralizing when you see like people, I don't know, just making tons of money and fame and fortune and doing goofy shit on YouTube and like you're trying to create a piece of art and nobody gives a shit.
Right. I'm sitting out there with my chainsaw in my hand and stuff, and there's this TikTok guy out there making millions of dollars for fucking eating stupid shit. I'm like, how the fuck does this work?
Yeah, there's life is cruel and unfair and the universe doesn't care and we're all going to die. That's basically it. Nothing matters, but I still I still try and write the best I can and hope that it can find an outlet in the world. France, for a lot of writers in my position, has been like, they have their own bleak outlooks on things and have their own struggles in their publishing industry. But it's like how you wish things were here in America. Like they champion writers, they love writers and celebrate them. It's like in their DNA. There are bookstores everywhere. People go to graduate school to learn how to be a bookseller.
Wow.
To learn how to go work in the publishing business. It's like a very noble profession. Whereas here it feels like it's like a lot of people just think of it like, oh, it's just a retail job, which is not true. I don't want to demean indie booksellers in this country are great, but France has been the one like glimmer of hope, where it's like I know I'll be published well there. I don't have to beg online every day for people to buy my book, which is I feel shame every time I go on Twitter and Facebook and try and promote my books. I hate it, right? But in France, I don't have to do that. My publisher does that for me. They have relationships with booksellers across the country, and I know every book I write will have an opportunity to be read and reviewed, and maybe and I have a readership over there that I can continue to earn and cultivate. I don't have that at all here, unfortunately. So unless you get a movie or TV show, it's really really hard to get any notice. So
Yeah, that's crazy. It seems to be a trend too. I know audiobooks have been out a while, but it seems like audiobooks are like the number one thing. And I'm guilty of listening to audiobooks. I do it when I'm at work, if I'm driving around in the truck or something at a time, or I get my headphones on. It seems like that's like the trend right now.
yeah, and obviously the advent of podcasts too. It's a very convenient way for people to consume stuff that is of interest to them or entertaining or educational, whatever. And I'm all for it. I know a lot of people who are what you would think you'd call a voracious reader, but they strictly listen to audiobooks. That's how they consume a book. And I think that's totally cool. I could care less, how, you want to, experience a story. And that's cool to me. Having my first audiobook out is, again, it's a real trip. Very, very cool. I'm glad it was able to happen. And I'm glad people can experience my writing in that way. It's really, really neat thing to finally have.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that definitely get a lot of exposure too, because all the audiobooks going around now, like it's a big thing, and there's a bunch of different ways to get audiobooks, like different like I think Scrib is what I use, and that's really killer. It's got a lot of cool audiobooks on there. I think Stephen King's publishing company owns that one, and then you have like Audible, which Audible is also cool. So you got options.
Yeah, when I was kind of just putting out some posts on social media when the audiobook came out last Tuesday, I realized there are all these cool retailers out there. There's another one too, I think is Libro or Libro FM, which works with your local independent bookseller and shares some profits of a sale with independent bookstores. And that's an interesting business model too. So, and I get, again, it's like if you're in a band, like I don't care how you listen to my music. Preferably you want to sell it so you can make some money is nice, right? But it's like, if you're in a band, like you're hoping someone's going to buy a shirt at the merch table.
Right, yeah.
Because, a lot of people don't buy records anymore or buy the record on vinyl. So it's again, I could care less how you buy it, who you buy it from. I'm not going to discriminate, that's to each his own as far as I'm concerned. And the more the merrier, if you ask me.
Yeah, when I was doing band stuff, man, I just wanted our music out there. Like we could sell the merch, we play live and all that stuff. But when it comes to finding us, I want the easiest way possible to find us. I just want you to hear us. That's a big thing for me. So I was happy with some of the streaming stuff, even though you're not going to make any money with none of the streaming services, but at least it gives you the exposure that you didn't have before that.
Yeah, the accessibility is great, especially if maybe you're first starting out. I'm thinking in terms of like a band in particular, because that's a big frame of reference for me still. I don't play music anymore, but I spent almost 10 years participating in cable. I would fly up and record vocals on albums. I'd join them and play live whenever possible, but they were based in Connecticut and I was in Atlanta, so it was a challenge, but I still think in those terms, and I don't know. It's just really hard. And as a writer, you could self-publish and it's like a drop in the ocean. You hope maybe people discover it, and maybe if that's all you're after, then that's a great route. But it's also very limiting, and that you're just not going to maybe reach the audience that you possibly could compared to a larger publisher with bigger distribution. So, it sucks. It sucks. It's like a band, you do aspire like to have a nice product made. So you want to be on a good label that does vinyl and is going to do a good job on it from a production standpoint, right? And you want to have cool merch. So all those things at least validate the process and make you feel a sense of accomplishment, if anything. So.
Yeah, definitely want to have good merch. I remember our last design we did, because my band's not active anymore, but our last design was from David Paul Seymour. Hope I'm getting his name right there, but he's a badass fucking artist who's done like shit for High on Fire and Kai Lessa, you name it. He's probably done artwork for him. So that was cool to, get some merch done by him, and we sold out all that like a long time ago. So
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's still to this day in the heavy music community. Obviously, that's how most bands I think are actually have income is by selling merch out on the road, in particular, because I don't think anyone's really selling as many records as to make any money off of or earn out, on an advance or recording fees, et cetera. So Yeah, if I can impart one thing on anybody out there listening, like go to a show and buy something at the first table.
Right.
Like,
Because that's the only way to really support, man. You can help those people get to their next area to play at, like that's how we used to almost break even every once in a while on tour, like just by selling merch, because it wasn't really for getting paid at these shows. Like the pay was crap, you don't get shit, and
oh, you don't get
the
anything
merch
from
still
them.
get you going.
Yeah, yeah, especially with the cost of gas the past 6 months or so. It's hard out there for touring bands. I do my one. Still been a challenge when we had our son, and balancing all that and family stuff is like getting out to shows like I used to, and I miss it because I went to my first show after the pandemic. I saw Melvin COC in Ministry in Atlanta, and it
Oh,
was so
nice.
nice to be like in a music venue again and have a couple beers and not stress about all this crap going on. And man, I reminded me of why like going to a show and seeing live music is such a precious thing,
Right. I'm glad to see live music like rolling again now, since the craziness isn't quite as crazy. So hopefully it stays like this, people can get out and go to shows.
Yeah, and if they can figure out like what's reasonable with COVID, so that stuff doesn't have to get canceled. And it's hard enough to tour, and to worry that like, okay, somebody in the band's going to test positive and we're going to have to cancel the whole thing, as opposed to like maybe treating it a little bit more reasonably, as far as I don't know. I don't want to go on a tangent there, but I was just thinking as like Steve Von Till. I missed him in Atlanta because my wife and I both got COVID.
Oh,
And
man.
he had like an issue in Chicago, like with someone ran into their trailer, and I
Yep,
was
I saw that.
yeah, and I was just like, it reminded me of like what a challenge it is just to put together a tour like at that level, and all the shit that goes wrong. And then on top of that, you're dealing with the lingering effects of the pandemic and this contagion still circulating. And I'm like, man, I don't miss it. I don't miss trying to play shows in a band, because it was just took a lot of work and was a lot of stress.
Yeah, people don't understand what, like I have coworkers tell me, "Oh, you're going on tour, man. Oh, you're going on vacation. That's gonna be fun." I was like, dude, what I do on tour is harder than what I do at work, man. You have no idea.
Oh yeah, there are moments of joy, and then there's a lot that goes into touring. And I never did it at a hardcore level at all. So I don't want to have that misconception like Mike has done in Tombs. But we play out on weekends, do a run of shows in a row, and yeah, it's grueling. And when I see bands that are out there on the road 9 months out of the year, it's nothing but respect, especially at the heavy music level where you're playing 600-ish type venues, or small clubs. That's grueling. And I just like astounded when I see bands that are just road dogs to this day. I know like Goat Whore and Incantation are swinging through. I think next week in Atlanta, I'm going to try and go. And I'm like, Goat Whore has just been on the road for 10 years straight.
Yeah, it never stop.
Yeah, and I see that, and there are bands like that, and I'm just absolutely amazed they're able to do that and continue to, because yeah, I don't know, man. The road definitely can separate the men from the boys, as far as, and the ladies from the gals, I guess, as far as it's a labor of love for so many of those bands.
Yeah, the longest we stayed out was it was only 3 weeks. We didn't do like no major tours, but we were out for 3 weeks. We'd do a couple weeks here and there, like that, like once a year to save up all our time at work and then go tour the United States and stuff. And yeah, it gets rough, dude, especially sleeping in a van down in San Antonio in the middle of the summer after playing a DIY show with no AC down in a basement.
Oh, I've been there, man. I've done the DIY basement shows, sleeping at a truck stop in a rented van, and that's misery. There's nothing glamorous about that at all. But when you're making really weird ass music that the audience is limited and the opportunities just aren't there. When I was doing really active in bands, there wasn't there weren't a lot of venues, and it was really hard to even put together just get a show where you're like constantly begging to get on shows and stuff. Now I don't know if it's any easier. It does feel like there's a lot of opportunities there for bands. It's just still a dogfight. It reminds me of publishing and like writers. There are a lot of indie presses out there, and there's places where writers can get their work released, find an outlet for it. But it's still it's still not ideal. There's a lot of great writers, like I said, who don't get the recognition I think they deserve. A lot of great bands out there too that don't.
Right. Yeah, it's such an oversaturated market, man, and there's so much good shit out there too. Like you just got to dig and look because there's so much other stuff that ain't so good, but you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Before we go, I was going to ask you, what are some of your like favorite horror movies of all time? Just, you don't have to be like number one or number two, just some of your favorites.
Oh, sure, man. Yeah, I don't keep up with the genre like I used to. I'm turning into like a crotchety old like horror movie fan, but I can give you like a quick and dirty list. I absolutely adore all the Universal monster movies. Uh, Creature from the Black Lagoon's my favorite monster of all time, but all the Universal classics are on my Mount Rushmore, so to speak. And I sort of think in terms of filmmakers more so than individual films a lot of time. But I love Hammer Films too as a studio.
Hmm.
All their classic stuff with uh, the Dracula films, Frankenstein films, with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Those those I adore and I watch every year. Every October, I watch a lot of Hammer movies. I love Val Lewton, like I Walked with a Zombie, Cat,
Hmm.
etc. And I love filmmakers, especially like David Cronenberg's probably one of my favorite directors of all time. So I love especially his body horror stuff. So
Oh, yeah.
Videodrome, Scanners, which is more science fiction, obviously. He's kind of a lot of crossover science fiction and horror genres. His early stuff like Rabid and it's not Tremor, Shivers. And yeah, so Cronenberg is very high on my list as far as horror stuff too. So the older I get, the less I'm interested in gory, hardcore shit and transgressive horror. It's cool, and I'll watch that stuff, but I find myself gravitating to older, iconic black and white films and those beautiful Hammer films from the '60s and early '70s.
Right, especially with all the remasters too that come out every year. Like you get to really see that in like full HD. It's like a
Oh,
work of
they're
art.
great. I mean, nothing is more fun for me than like a nice, cool, crisp fall day, like middle of October on a Friday, and I know I'm going to listen to Electric Wizard and drink some like Great Pumpkin Ale, and I'm going to watch a couple Hammer movies, or like a Saturday afternoon. Like that is absolute heaven to me. Those movies, like those first six Dracula films of Christopher Lee, the Frankenstein films. Speaking of the Hammer films in particular, um, uh, was it Curse of the Werewolf, which with Oliver Reed is
Mhm.
absolutely fantastic. I adore that film too. Yeah, there's about a dozen Hammer films, and I watch them every single fall. And that's like that's my ideal October day, is like a Saturday afternoon with like good beer, some great vinyl, and like some Hammer films lined up on the DVD player.
Yeah, Electric Wizard and Hammer Films. That's a hell of a combo, man. That's a
Oh,
good combo.
they go together. That is the perfect pairing for sure. And then what I like is the atmosphere of the Hammer films. All the Terrence Fisher directed stuff is those films are beautifully made, and stylish, and they just never. I've never found fault with them at all. And I love those films. And the older I get, trust me, man, I grew up on Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, The Exorcist. I love John Carpenter too, and all of his iconic films. I mean, The Thing is probably my favorite film of all time, not just horror film. But
Mhm.
as I get older, I'm gravitating towards atmosphere and of and mood and ambience, and so the type of filmmaking you saw in the 50s and 60s and 70s compared to gnarly modern shit, which is cool. And trust me too, I like crazy ass 80s slasher stuff too. I do like it all. I don't discriminate, but I'm getting older and I guess more delicate.
Yeah, my tastes have changed some too. I used to be all like blood and guts, back in like the '90s and stuff like that. And I still like some blood and guts type shit, slashers and everything. But I like dark, moody, kind of psychological stuff now. Real dark mentally. Not really dark murders and all that kind of stuff. Like Mandy's my perfect film. So if you're in that type of genre, I'm gonna like your shit.
Yeah, that really hits what I'm interested in now with modern horror. But a lot of the modern horror stuff, it seems like the target audience is not me. It's like a 16-year-old or something. So I just gravitate to out of nostalgia to a lot of the movies that I wasn't alive watching Hammer films and the Universal films, but I have this like nostalgia for older horror and but yeah, I grew up on 90s stuff, and there's also really disturbing transgressive films like Inside and Martyrs, like the French wave of insanity, that I like those movies. I just have no desire to watch them ever again.
Yeah, they're not like, oh, I'm going to rewatch this one. They're kind of a one and done, but I really appreciate what those movies were.
Yeah, because they're exceptional films. What I can't tolerate is stuff that's just sort of, to each his own, and it's just not for me. If you like sort of exploitative, like you're a gore hound or something, I can watch that stuff. Or if it's on in the background for ambience and you're like listening to Cannibal Corpse or something, like, hey, that's cool, go for it. But I'm not a big fan of stuff that's sort of gratuitously violent, or if the violence isn't accomplishing something. Same with sex. I don't know if I'm just getting old fashioned in my old age, but I don't respond to that stuff like I used to. Maybe when you're younger, there's a moment where you're like, yes, gore, fucking blood, guts, And I grew up in the 80s and 90s watching all those iconic, slasher films, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger, and everything in between. But I don't respond to it like I used to.
Right, and it doesn't have that same feeling either. It's probably since we were younger, seeing that for like the first time, it's like, oh, this is new, like exciting shit. But now we're like used to that. We've seen it all.
Yeah, it's just there's very little, nothing new under the sun, so to speak. I'm trying to think of that Belgian film about the young woman who goes to the why am I blanking on the name? She goes to the veterinary school and learns that she and her family are cannibals, right?
Oh, that's right. It's on shit, that's right. I can see the damn box cover in my head.
Yes, and I'm blanking on the name. But either way, I saw that, I watched that last year, and it very much reminded me sensibility wise of like those smart early Cronenberg films. And although it has some grotesque, gory stuff in it, it's not over the top, very tasteful, and it's just like a very smart, interesting horror film. I don't keep up enough, I think, to speak with a lot of authority, because there's a lot of good stuff out there. But yeah, I don't know, man. Becoming a dad and you get older, I just don't really respond or seek out like the gory stuff like I used to.
The film was Raw, by the way. It's called Raw.
Yes, Raw, and I thought it was fantastic. It was kind of refreshing, smart horror film that I just felt like I had been lacking lately. A lot of this stuff where it's like spooky dolls and I don't know. It's still one of my favorite genres, but you have to really weed through a lot of junk out there, I guess.
You should definitely check out that director's other film that just came out recently called Titan.
Yes.
Heard of that one?
Things about it, yeah.
Oh yeah, you talking about it's Cronenberg all day, man. It's so fucking wild.
Yeah, that's cool. I definitely add it to the list. I'm already curating like my October movie list. I do it sort of every year. I get excited and just start making lists of stuff I want to rewatch, near and dear classics, and then new films like that I'll make a note of so I can catch up. Because I don't know, man. Like, yeah, once my son was born, things get complicated. Even I don't want to say I love my son to death, and being a father is like the greatest thing that ever happened to me. But your time to read gets limited. I used to read a book every couple days. Now I'm like lucky to read one or two a month. And even watching film and TV, I fall way behind. So I'm always looking for choice recommendations like that.
Cool. What I do sometime next week or so, I can email you over some recommendations if you like, some weird shit I think you might dig. So
please do. Yeah, like I said, I'm curating my October movie watching list, because Halloween is not one day for us in our household. I celebrate Halloween till about Christmas, so it's a 3-month holiday for me.
Halloween every day, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, it's been great talking with you, man. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah, Brandon, thanks so much for having me on, man. It's great to finally meet and chat, and maybe we'll run into each other at a merch table, some heavy show down the road.
Hey, you never know. Like I said, Toombs is probably going to be going out on the road here, I think, in the fall, from what Mike said. He's kind of keeping that under wraps. I can't say nothing else that I know about that. But he's going to be doing it again. Hopefully he'll come around this way and maybe we can all meet up or something.
That would be great. I regret that I couldn't make it because of daddy duty, that last run they did in Atlanta. So yeah, for sure, if you find yourself in the Atlanta area, and if I want to make sure I catch Tombs on their next swing through town. So
Hell yeah, man. Well, have a great rest of your weekend, dude, and we'll talk again soon.
all right, cool, man. Great talking to you. Bye now.
Take it easy.